Hello and welcome to Storytime with Mr. Ryan. April is National Poetry Month, which means it's time to explore and celebrate the fantastic and profound literary art we call poetry. And today I'm taking us way back to the days of the New World to explore the life of one Anne Bradstreet, a Puritan woman who became America's first published poet. Bradstreet grew up in a male-dominated society, a time when women weren't allowed to attend school, and they certainly weren't allowed to be writers. But Bradstreet used her poetic art form in order to express herself in a time where she would otherwise be silenced. That's why today we read Poet, Pilgrim, Rebel, the story of Anne Bradstreet, America's first published poet. Written by Katie Munday Williams with illustrations by Tanya Rex. Let's hop on in. England, 1620. 8-year-old Anne Dudley was different from other girls. She had a secret. She wanted to be a writer. But girls weren't allowed to attend school, and they certainly weren't allowed to be writers. Like other Puritan girls, Anne learned how to read and write at home so she could study the Bible. She also learned to obey her parents and to cook and keep house. Most days, Anne rushed through her chores and then snuck to the library, her favorite room in the house. There, her father shared his love of poetry. Anne devoured books like corn pudding. Some nights, Anne listened to her father's friends discuss music, astronomy, and medicine. Anne was encouraged to voice her opinions, something girls were not usually allowed to do. Listen and learn. Listen and learn. This was the rhythm of Anne's days. Anne and her father read poetry together and studied how poems worked. The words comforted her. She turned to poems when she felt worried or sad. When Anne was 16, she married her father's assistant, Simon Bradstreet. Simon was kind and quick to laugh. Anne loved discussing her thoughts and opinions with him. Together, they admired astronomers, marveled over musicians, and pored over poetry. The year Anne turned 18, everything changed. The King of England disagreed with the Puritans on how to worship God. He ordered Puritan churches to be closed or burned. 10 years before, a small group of Puritans had decided to move to what they called the New World, an ocean away. Now, Anne's husband and father decided their families would go too. Anne cried in secret about leaving her home, but she did not complain. She tucked her thoughts into her bonnet and prepared for the long voyage. The trip across the ocean was difficult. The ship bucked and creaked. Passengers were crammed together. Anne was sad and bored. With no room to spare on the ship, her books had to be left behind. In Massachusetts, they joined a struggling colony of about 200 people. The Puritans had claimed land where indigenous people known as Algonquins lived. Many Puritans were sick from lack of food and medicine. Anne and her family set to work caring for the sick and building the Puritan community they had dreamed of. Work and sleep, work and sleep. Anne's life had a new rhythm. Even in this new home, Anne found poetry all around her. Bang, bang, bang. Hammers reminded Anne of the rhythm of poems. Cheer up, cheer up. The song of the birds cheered her as she worked. It was a hard life. Anne worried about the colony and her family. But as a good Puritan woman, she kept quiet. When Anne was 20, she became very sick. She coughed and shivered in her bed. Anne worried that she was being punished for her doubts about the new world. When she finally got better, Anne wanted to do something to show how thankful she was. Anne again turned to poetry for comfort. This time, she wrote her own poem. Anne knew that outspoken women could be banished from the colony. She also knew the Puritans valued religious poetry. So Anne made her first poem about thanking God. She praised God for healing her, and she promised to be a good person. Paper was as precious as food, so Anne couldn't waste a single piece. Line by line, she had first written her poem in her mind, and when it felt finished, Anne shaped the words with her pen. Proudly and with a little fear, Anne shared her poem. She showed it to her husband, her mother and sisters, and her minister. To her delight, nobody told her to stop writing. Instead, everyone praised her poem. From then on, words flowed from her quill. The following year, Anne had even more reason to feel blessed. She gave birth to her first child. Simon was often away for work, and Anne found herself alone most nights. At first, she was sad and missed him terribly. And then she realized that this time to herself was an opportunity. At night, while the baby slept, Anne lit a candle and sat with her books and parchment. All the thoughts she had kept to herself over the years tumbled out onto the paper. The colony grew, and so did Anne's family. Anne had 7 more children. She also boldly branched out in her writing. Anne wrote about her feelings, her family, and her opinions on world politics. It was unheard of for a woman to write this way. Anne wanted a way to stay respectable while also writing the way she wanted to. She decided to humbly make fun of her own poems. She wrote about what she called her feeble attempts at writing. It worked. Men saw that here was a woman who wrote well and who was also a great wife and mother. One day, Anne's brother-in-law took Anne's poems with him to England. Anne hoped they would calm growing tensions between England and the colonies. Many of the poems begged for peace. Months went by as Anne waited anxiously for news. Would people accuse her of copying from a man? She feared she would be cast out if men disapproved of her writing. Almost 3 years later, in 1650, a book of her poems was published. When Anne learned about it months later, she was already famous. Anne's rebellious writing was no longer a secret. Her beautiful, clever poetry was beloved on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. She received many letters thanking her for her writing. Anne had shown that women could be great writers. She had paved the way for others, and she was proud of her message of peace, harmony, and love. Well, thank you guys so much for watching this wonderful story about the life of Anne Bradstreet. Truly an inspiring figure who paved the way for feminism and for women to be able to do anything. I truly love the art of poetry and have spent a lot of time learning about how it works. And if you enjoy reading poetry, perhaps you'll learn about meter and how it's written as well. Thank you guys for watching. I hope this encourages you to check out some awesome poems and learn a little bit more about National Poetry Month. I had a wonderful time reading with you, and I encourage you to check out some of my other stories on this channel. Until next time, I'll be seeing you. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye now.